Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 13th of May. I'm Erin Viner. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. In our top story, the Knesset has just passed a bill that will allow for the expansion of the government. This now frees Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to appoint ministers to the remaining cabinet posts. Here with the latest is IBA's political correspondent, Ellie Wogelenter.
The marathon Knesset deliberations over the bill to enable expanding the cabinet is over, and we now have a government and a much larger cabinet. The bill passed 61-59 as expected, with all coalition members voting for and all opposition voting against. Members of the opposition issued strong critiques of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during the debate in a last-ditch effort to stop the bill. Opposition leader Yitzhak Herzog attacked Netanyahu, saying instead of solving the country's problems, the Prime Minister is selling the country, intending to waste $500 million shekels to keep his Knesset members calm. Yisrael Beitenu chairman Avigdor Lieberman also attacked Netanyahu's coalition, saying the problem with this government is that it has no sense of taste or smell. It has no future, no hope, no dream. With this, we will have to live, and I hope we will only live with this for a short while. The government called for the vote by name and not a secret ballot, which implies that Netanyahu did not trust his coalition members, and this was only the first bill being voted on in the 20th Knesset. Netanyahu will now begin informing his Likud ministers which portfolios they will receive, and the government is expected to be sworn in tomorrow. Senior Likud officials believe that most party MKs will ultimately be satisfied with the roles they receive. In addition to the 5 current Likud ministers, Moshe Ya'alon, Israel Katz, Silvan Shalom, Yuval Steinitz, and Gilad Erdan, there are 11 candidates looking to become first-time ministers: Miri Regev, Danny Danon, Yariv Levin, Zev Elkin, Ayub Kara, Gila Gamliel, Ofer Akunis, Tzachi Hanegbi, Chaim Katz, Benny Begin, and Tzipi Chotovelli. 7 from this second group will become ministers. 1 will chair the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and it is believed 1 will be appointed Deputy Foreign Minister. Netanyahu intends to keep the Foreign Affairs portfolio for himself. The Prime Minister might also appoint a Likud MK as Deputy Communications Minister and keep the communications portfolio for himself. There was also a chance a Likud MK will be appointed as the next Israeli ambassador to the UN, replacing Ron Prosor, the current ambassador, who is leaving the position. However, a number of Likud MKs have already clarified that they are not interested in that post. Senior officials in Likud have said that they are not concerned that the MKs not chosen as ministers will try to sabotage the fragile coalition, said one official. No Likud MK will try to topple the government because of a position he hasn't received. They will obviously be disappointed, but Netanyahu has the right tools to compensate them. He can also give them the title of Deputy Prime Minister or Deputy Minister without appointing a minister above them. Erin?
Thanks for that report. In another news, U.S. President Barack Obama says that he has not given up hope for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but that tensions in the region have made progress difficult. He made the comment during an interview with the Arabic language Al-Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper based in London. Obama also said that he looks to the new Israeli government and the Palestinians to demonstrate through policies and actions a genuine commitment to the two-state solution. A White House comment on the issue made it clear that the Obama administration has adopted a wait-and-see attitude about Jerusalem's newly sworn-in leaders.
We did, and the President did indicate that the Prime Minister's comments about the pursuit of a two-state solution necessarily prompted a reconsideration of our approach to trying to resolve the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but that in no way inhibited our ability to communicate with the Israelis, particularly when it comes to our security cooperation. And the United States has continued to take a variety of steps, even in a range of multilateral fora, to stand up diplomatically for Israel, even in situations that left the United States feeling a little isolated. But that underscores the depth of not just the President's commitment to our relationship with Israel, but it reflects the depth of the relationship between our two countries, one that has persisted across generations, and one that has persisted even as the leaders of the two countries have been representing different political parties. And that kind of bipartisan commitment to Israel is a hallmark of that relationship and reflects the deep ties between our two countries that endure to this day.
So we shouldn't expect any announcements or changes to be made?
No, I wouldn't expect any broad announcements. But you know, the approach that we take to trying to facilitate a resolution of the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians is necessarily different because of the comments made by the Prime Minister in the closing days of his election.
Security chiefs from the Arab world will convene in Washington tonight for a conference with President Obama focused on Iran's increasingly aggressive behavior. The talks will relocate to the president's Camp David retreat on Thursday in what will be an opportunity to review negotiations with respect to Iran's nuclear program, as well as Tehran's efforts to destabilize the region. The member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council are desperate for coordinated efforts with the U.S. to collectively face the aggressive moves by the hardline Islamic Republic. Only the Kuwaiti and Qatari heads of state are attending the summit, while Bahrain, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates sent lower-level representatives. The White House says that the meeting comes at a critical moment in the Middle East history as the world powers renew talks with Iran toward finalizing the nuclear accord. The latest round of talks opened in Vienna last night and are part of diplomatic efforts to reach a comprehensive agreement by the end of June. Diplomats are trying to fill gaps in the April 2nd framework pact that would curb Iran's nuclear program in return for relief from international economic sanctions. Speaking on the sidelines of a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Turkey, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry expressed the hope that an Iranian nuclear deal can be reached, as well as a clear policy to combat Tehran's promotion of terrorism in the Middle East.
We talked about the Iran nuclear talks and the unanimity between the P5+1 that we will move into these last 6 weeks of negotiations with a view to securing the good agreement that we have talked about, in which we will have adequate access and in which the 4 pathways to a nuclear weapon will in fact be shut down. We're very hopeful, everybody here is, that that can be a successful negotiation and bring about a transformation within the region. And I think all of the member states feel very strongly that defining a more, a clearer defense arrangement between the GCC and other friendly countries in the United States is going to be critical to helping to push back against the terrorism as well as some of the other activities that take place in that region that are unsettling.
Visiting German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen told Prime Minister Netanyahu that her nation is scrupulously taking note of Israel's concerns over the emerging nuclear deal with Iran. During a press conference held at the Premier's office in Jerusalem, von der Leyen said that while she was here, she held intensive talks with Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon about the Lausanne Nuclear Framework Accord with Tehran. She said that it is important for her nation, which is one of the P5+1 countries in talks with Tehran, to listen very precisely to what Israel's concerns and suggestions are, while offering assurance that they will be taken into account when setting the terms of the final treaty. Netanyahu again reiterated the danger of any agreement with Iran that does not completely eliminate the possibility that it can produce atomic weapons.
I think a better deal is required than the one that is proposed in Lausanne, and I believe that this is important for our common future and our common security. Every time that I've had the opportunity to speak to Chancellor Merkel, I was impressed with her understanding of these great challenges. And I look forward to discussing this with you and how to further advance our cooperation.
In Yemen, there is an increasing possibility of a showdown at sea between Tehran and Riyadh over an Iranian ship allegedly bringing aid and humanitarian supplies to the Houthi insurgents as the 5-day ceasefire takes hold. We get more in this report from IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan.
The battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the two regional powers, is approaching the boiling point. The Saudis are attacking the pro-Iranian Houthi rebels from the air and have declared all of Yemen a closed military zone. Just last month, they prevented an Iranian airlift of supplies, disguised as humanitarian aid, to the rebels when a few minutes before they landed, the Saudis bombed the airport in Sana'a. But Iran is not giving up. They have sent a cargo ship with 2,500 tons of humanitarian aid to Yemen. The Iranians say they're going to break the Saudi blockade. The Iranian Navy has said it will be safeguarding the Iranian vessel, which is headed for the rebel-held port of Hodeidah, with flour, rice, canned food, and medical supplies. They also have international activists aboard, much like the Turkish Mavi Marmara that tried to break the Israeli Navy blockade on Gaza in 2010.
The main goal of the event is to bring international attention to the situation there and also break the Saudi imposed blockade. The passengers of the ship consist of a group of journalists, a band of volunteer doctors, and also a group of international activists, anti-war activists, which are from Germany, the US, and France. And they're here to just report the event, which is going to be which is going to have a huge effect on the international media and everything.
I'm here on board of this ship, Iran Shahid, to make sure that the world gets to know, help that the world gets to know about the atrocities of the US-backed Saudis in Yemen against the civilian population, against any law. It's a multi-criminal, brutal massacring of civilian people.
The Iranians say they won't allow anyone to board the ship to check its cargo. Now, we're waiting to see how the Saudis will behave towards this vessel and if we are on the verge of a sea battle. In Washington, a White House spokesman has warned Tehran that this sort of political stunt could sabotage a tentative ceasefire that is going into effect.
Iran understands that they can't afford to play games with humanitarian assistance to people who are in dire need, like we see in Yemen. And the Iranians know as well as anyone that a political stunt to defy their regional rivals outside the UN system is provocative and risks a collapse of the UN-led humanitarian ceasefire that's scheduled to go in place later today.
Saudi Arabia and its coalition forces who are backing exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi announced the 5-day truce, which allows for the shipment of food and medicine to the besieged country after international aid agencies warned that Yemen was on the brink of collapse. Residents of the capital Sana'a remain skeptical that the ceasefire will hold, but say that a lull in the fighting will bring badly needed aid into the country. Ari O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Returning now to the Camp David Summit, and IBA's Oli Wolgalenter asked Middle East analyst Professor Gerald Steinberg about the impact that the apparent diplomatic snub of the American president by the Saudi and other Gulf leaders who chose not to attend.
It says at least two things about the White House operation. First of all, it says they don't have the support, the public visible support from the Gulf. If the Saudis are not there, there may be other representatives from the Gulf states, but their heart's not in it. And this is a very clear public slap in the face. In some ways, for the President, for Obama, this is worse than Mr. Netanyahu coming to the White House, going to the Congress and opposing his own policies.
Worse why?
Worse because the Saudis rarely speak up. And by not showing up, that speaks volumes. In one clear picture or absence of picture, he's not going to be in those pictures. And the second thing is, you would think that the White House would have checked first before they announced this conference. If they had their intelligence systems working properly, you don't start a major diplomatic effort without checking to see if the people you want there are going to come. And the fact that they did that tells you also how much in disarray and how dysfunctional the White House is, at least on these issues.
In light of Saudi Arabia not coming to this conference that President Obama is calling, how much pressure does that bring to kill the whole deal with Iran?
It's very hard to tell whether the deal is killable or not. In some ways, it looks like the president is going to go straight forward. Whatever the Iranians agree to, he's going to sign on to. There's no visible sign of any pressure on the Iranians. It's true the Congress is now involved, something that Obama did not want. But it seems, at least from many of the analysts, that the congressional involvement is very limited. They really can't do very much with the legislation that's out there. But maybe it's the beginning of a process where there'll be more and more congressional opposition. So it may not be a done deal. We might find out that when the agreement is signed that you're going to see more and more opposition, and the people are going to side. In the Congress, you'll have people who may have said, I'm usually with the president on the Democratic side, but I've got the Israelis telling me this is a disaster, and I've got the Saudis and the Gulf states telling me it's a disaster, and the Egyptians. So I got to listen to them too. That's going to hurt Obama's ability to push this through.
And how does the snub by Saudi Arabia impact on Israel? Saudi Arabia is now, in effect, aligning itself with Israel, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, What does that say to the world and to President Obama?
What you see now, if we look back on all of the controversy and the criticism of Mr. Netanyahu's trip to Washington, his speech in the Congress, the snub from the White House and the angry words that we heard, and now from almost every angle except from the White House and the State Department, it's clear that Netanyahu was ahead of the game. That he said the things in Congress that the Saudis are now saying, and they would have said it at the same time in the same words then as well. So in many ways, it's the Netanyahu coalition, and what we've got is an isolated President Obama, and not the opposite, which is the way that the Americans thought they would be able to portray it back at the time.
And how does that impact on Israel-U.S. relations?
I think the tensions there are still very strong. In some ways, in a sort of personal sense, in a domestic political way, here's Netanyahu showing again that he's got to step up on Obama. It's going to make it still very hard to reach some sort of commonality that has to be reached. Maybe now it'll be easier for the White House to take a step down and say, okay, we realize now that the entire Middle East, except for the Iranians, are against our policies, so we can work with Netanyahu in that broader coalition. And that's maybe more wishful thinking than anything we've seen coming out of Washington for the last few years.
The International Criminal Court is calling on Israel to provide reliable information regarding last summer's conflict in Gaza in order to conduct a preliminary investigation to possible war crimes. An ICC prosecutor at The Hague warned that if Jerusalem fails to comply, it will go ahead and launch a unilateral investigation based entirely on testimony provided by Palestinians. As of now, there has been no official Israeli response to those demands. In an interview with the Associated Press today, ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda announced her intention of conducting an independent and impartial inquiry that will be devoid of any political considerations. While urging both sides to cooperate, she stressed that if information is not provided, she will be forced to either find it elsewhere or to just proceed with one side of the story. Bensouda said that in the meantime, her office is trying to obtain a copy of a report released by the Israeli Breaking the Silence advocacy group, which cited testimony from combat soldiers alleging indiscriminate IDF fire killed Palestinian civilians during Operation Protective Edge. A special delegation of the National Magen David Adom Emergency Medical and Disaster Service is scheduled to leave for Nepal this afternoon to help bring 4 premature babies born through surrogacy and their Israeli fathers home to Israel. The young families were caught in the 7.3 magnitude earthquake that shook the country yesterday, that was the second to rock the Asian nation in less than 3 weeks. The expectant parents wanted to leave the Kathmandu hospital even before their children's births after the first quake on April 25th, but were unable to because the surrogate mothers lacked the necessary travel documents. A MADA spokesman says that all the passengers will be flown to Israel as soon as a plane can be arranged, including one infant who still requires an incubator. So far, there have been no official plans to resend an Israeli delegation to aid in the aftermath of the second quake that killed at least 68 people and injured thousands of others. Speaking in Jerusalem at the opening of the 5th Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Jews everywhere are facing a resurgence of hatred and urged them to come home to Israel.
Today, there is no doubt that we're living in an age of resurgent anti-Semitism. Jews everywhere are once again being slandered and vilified. This is taking place in the intolerant parts of the Middle East, but it's also taking place in what otherwise would be expected to be the tolerant parts of the West. It's taking place in Beirut, in Damascus, in Tehran, but it's also taking place, violently so, in Toulouse, in Paris, in Brussels, because along with vilification come the inevitable violent attacks. And Jews are now being targeted for being Jews. Now, Jews have the right to live freely and safely wherever they choose. And governments everywhere are responsible for guaranteeing this right. And I want to take this opportunity to praise all the governments that have been witnessing this resurgent anti-Semitism, their commitment to protect the rights of the Jews, the rights of individuals, the rights of their citizens. The representatives are here, and I praise you for it. But Jews also have the right to join us here in Israel. And if they make that choice, we will welcome them with open arms.
President Reuven Rivlin wrapped up this week's visit to Berlin with a formal meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. After a warm reception at the Chancellor's office, the two leaders held closed-door talks as part of Rivlin's visit to the European nation to commemorate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Rivlin was later hosted by German President Joachim Gauck at Berlin's Philharmonic Hall for a festive performance that included the works of Felix Mendelssohn, who was born to a prominent 19th century German Jewish family. The German president referenced the dark years of Nazi rule and the Holocaust and described the subsequent development of strong national ties as nothing short of a miracle that became reality, he said, because Israelis placed